I'm very excited to be here. This is my first time in Cape Town. This is my first time experiencing South African wine in a vineyard on a mountain overlooking this majestic earth. It's also my first time sharing this material at a conference. So bear with me, because I've got a little bit of nerves. And I'm going to kind of jump start, just in case I need, just for the first couple of slides. So will you allow me to hold on to these, just as I kind of get used to this a little bit. Well, I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm excited to talk to you about a very transformative piece of the Enneagram. In fact, it's probably the most powerful and transformative in my own life. And as a researcher, I have this desire to actually make sure that we're creating something together and we're setting intentions. So I just want to ask, let's contribute a little bit, for those of you who might be courageous. You know, what would make this time well spent today? Why are you here? There was something that drew you here. I'm thrilled to see all your faces. What would make this time well spent?
Energy.
Energy. To be. Ah, got it. Okay. Anything else? So if we have some energy, if we're being deep insight, okay.
A bit of provocation as well.
Bit of provocation.
Transformation.
Information? Transformation. Yeah. Good, okay. Open mind. Okay. With what?
With
Humor.
human.
Human. Ah, good. We're all human? Good. Okay, check. Great. Okay. So, yes, I'd like to start off our time by clearing a path and talking about what the Enneagram is and what it isn't. So, 20 years ago when I learned the Enneagram, it was a very obscure idea. And now it's becoming this global phenomenon, which is fantastic, right? And also perhaps sometimes not. Yeah? You know, you think about what is, when the Enneagram is being used to justify staying the same. We utilize it a lot. In fact, there's a lot of resources out there right now that are focused specifically on type. Right? Yeah. The other day, I read this article, and it was telling me what type of cosmetic I should buy. And all of you should buy, depending on our type. And I also found another one about what jewelry that, we should all perhaps like. I think it missed the mark on the jewelry. The cosmetic, it was right on. As a 7, I like sparkly things. I like to have options. It was this beautiful gold sparkly case with sparkly eyeshadow. They nailed it. So, yes, but what this can do is it can, again, reduce the Enneagram to what I call 9-number navel gazing. And this was me for 15 years, the expert navel gazer, where I played into and understood the character of my type. And, according to the Enneagram, if I walk in and say, I'm a 7, what already happens? Yeah, I'm scattered. Yes, that's why I've got my notes here for the beginning part, right? My jump start. Yes. And you start to make some assumptions, right? So perhaps that's all you need to know about me. I'm a 7. Yeah. But what I'd like to say is that what if we already knew enough about our type? And in this moment, we know enough. And if that's the case, if we know enough about our type, and by the way, it was an amazing accomplishment. I think it's fantastic when we understand who we've been and that there's patterns involved, right? But on this journey that we're on together today, I want to encourage you to think about that time when we found our type as like our base camp. Yeah. And the base camp, it's a fantastic place with a beautiful view, and perhaps we can rest for a while, but we can't stay here. Yeah, we've got somewhere else to go. So, after I learned my Enneagram type, perhaps like many of you, I learned all sorts of fun information, like wings and subtypes and Herminian and harmonic triads, right? All overactive for my, or candy for my overactive brain. So much to learn. Yes, but I'm also wondering if, when you think about the next transformative of your moment of your life, I believe that it will not come from knowing more about your type, but instead from learning about the 3 centers of intelligence: our head, our heart, and our gut. And it's perhaps the most overlooked and underutilized aspect of the Enneagram. So, integrative intelligence is this idea that when we utilize, we all have these 3 centers. We have a head center for thinking and perceiving, and we have this heart center for feeling and emoting. We have this gut center for sensing and knowing. And when we can utilize the system together on a daily basis, this is what I call integrative intelligence. So, again, if our type is just our base camp, this next part of the journey to integration is our path to the summit. So today, this is what we'll be doing. We'll be exploring these 3 centers in more detail. And we'll also be learning the unique languages that each of these centers speaks, and also practicing some of those new skills. And for those of you that know already about these 3 centers, I invite you to take a step back and really pay attention and learn about these languages that these speak. It's very unique. So before I do, I want to give an acknowledgement. If I have anything interesting to say, it's because of those that have come before me and also, unfortunately, have left us, perhaps a bit too soon. George Gurdjieff, who I did not know, but I hear he was a fascinating character. David Daniels and Don Riso, who I had the pleasure separately of being in both of their last level 1 trainings that they taught, which was quite an experience. And also, someone that you don't know, but my dear friend Cameron Donnell, who passed away unfortunately at a young age of 37, and we used to have so many deep discussions about the Enneagram. And I loved the discussions that we had, and it actually led to me being here now. And, but before, I actually, in spite of our storytelling request, and when we're thinking about, as Dirk so beautifully said earlier today, about the arts and sciences and consciousness, the true story of integrative intelligence actually starts with me and my story, and a story that I'm going to tell you today. And perhaps this is why I'm feeling a little bit of these nerves, because this is the first time I've shared this particular story in a conference setting, and it's quite personal. But it was February of 2015, and I laid packed in ice in a hospital room. I had 104 fever, and my white blood cell count had been dangerously low for a few days. And as the doctor came in the middle of the night, he asked if I had anyone there with me, and I said no. Because my parents had been coming back and forth from Cincinnati, Ohio, where they lived, and Tucson, Arizona, where I lived, for the past 8 months, back and forth. And they had just gone back on a plane a few days prior. And I remember asking my nurse, "Can I please have a blanket?" She said, "Christy, I'm sorry, no." She had tears in her eyes. And to give you more context for the story, I'm going to back up 8 months earlier. It was June of 2014. And I had gone in for a regular doctor's visit. And at the very end of the visit, my doctor felt a lump. And she knew immediately when she touched it what it was. But I didn't think much about it. I wasn't worried. And she said, Christy, I'm leaving the country in a few days. I would just feel better if you went and had some tests. And before I knew it, everything was arranged and I was off on my way having these tests. I'm so not concerned about it, I didn't even tell anyone, except for my husband. And those tests led to more tests, which led to a few more tests. And then I got a call from my doctor's nurse and said, and she usually was very joyful, but she was very somber and said, Christy, we need you to come in tomorrow morning at 11 and bring your husband. And still, perhaps the optimist in me, there you go, there's some seven language. I showed up the next morning, and at this very sidewalk, I walked into the doctor's office, and it's what happened next that I want to call your attention to. Because as I walked in, I experienced this very unfamiliar feeling in my gut. And all of a sudden then I realized my body was hot. My hands were clammy. And I looked in the faces of the office staff, and something shocked me. It's like they were looking at me in a strange way, that they knew something that I didn't know. And immediately I turned around and I was out of there. I paced this very sidewalk, up and down, up and down. I probably would have jumped in the car, but I realized my husband had the keys inside. So he came out a few minutes later and said the doctor was ready to see us. And as I walked down that hallway, that 30 seconds down the hallway to her office, to my doctor's office, I noticed that my brain was jumping back to all of the conversations that I had just had with the doctors and the nurses. Why did that nurse ask me if there was cancer in my family? Why did that doctor come in and look at me that way? And I was jumping to the future. What's the doctor about to tell me? And as I sat down, my doctor, Dr. Stacy Gale, was just wonderful, came in, looked straight ahead, sat down, and looked at me and said, Christy, we have some things to talk about. And things are going to move fast. And it was that day I learned I had a rare and aggressive cancer. And things did move fast. In fact, I took this picture at the very first surgery that I was going into in June. The next months were filled with chemo and surgeries and hospital visits and tests and doctor's visits and a divorce. Because cancer has this very fascinating way of either bringing people together or pulling them apart. And in my case, it was the latter. So, back to the hospital bed. This is me probably at my lowest point. But, spoiler alert, things got better because I'm here. Yes, after a few days, after a day, I was able to, they took the ice away. My white blood cell count started to rise. My parents jumped back on a plane and got back to where we were. And so I started to improve, and I started to feel better. And it was really fascinating because I started to capitalize on this idea that there was more to me than I previously knew. It was as if I was experiencing on a more regular basis that there were these parts of me, perhaps this internal committee that I had, this head, this heart, this gut. There was more. It was more complex, and I had these different centers with which to draw upon. So yes, as I had finished all of my treatments, I had some family that put me on a boat, and we all went across the Atlantic Ocean from the U.S. to Spain. And this was me celebrating a glass of wine. And fascinatingly enough, 1 month from today will be my 5-year of my cancer being in remission. then it has to be one from today. So, I think it's important for us to talk first of all about systems and what a system is, because our bodies are a system. And you think about the definition, a collection of parts that when organized serves a purpose and performs a task. So some examples of a system. A car, right? It's got many different interworking parts. You have to have them all together for them to work effectively, efficiently. The solar system, another example of a complete system. The triadic system. You think about this within the Enneagram. In order to know, we have, when you think about the Enneagram as a whole, we have to have a 3, a 6, a 9. They all have to work together, right? They're all complete. As Dirk said, they all happen at the same time. Yeah. It's as if I see our bodies, I see my body as a 3-story house or a 3-story building. And there's one part, I don't know if you have this in your own homes, but there's a part of my house I like to spend the most time in. Yeah? So there's this floor that I spend the most time on. And then I end up not utilizing the other floors. And I can kind of shut them off a little bit, or I crank up the air conditioning and the lights and everything on the floor that I'm spending the most time on. Yeah. And what happens with that is I'm not cleaning the other parts, the other floors, or I'm not spending as much time there. And I may be overutilizing that one particular center or that particular floor. When I think about what happens if I'm constantly having the air conditioner run, right? It'll run, and the lights and everything's running. And then at some point, perhaps the air conditioner might burn out a little sooner than if all 3 were working and perhaps on a lower temperature, right? So, yes, George Gurdjieff, he talked about the 3 centers. He didn't talk about them like the Enneagram types as we know them today, right? And then we talk about science. We've got Dr. Paul MacLean, who was kind of an early neuroscientist, and some of his theories have been changed a bit, but when you think about, he talked about this triune brain. Our human brain is comprised of these 3 distinct subbrains. And when you think about these different parts of the brain, we've got the neocortex that regulates cognition and language and spatial reasoning. And we've got the mammalian part of the brain that regulates feeling and emotion. Or perhaps the reptilian brain that regulates the instincts. And Dan Siegel, who I've had the pleasure of getting to meet and hear, he talks about humans are complete and complex systems. We're not just our mental life or mind. We're not just our emotions. And we're not just our instincts and sensations. So, but we may have that lens from which we view the world, right? We have that lens that we perhaps overutilize, one of those centers. So a couple centering thoughts. We have thoughts, emotions, and sensations. It is part of being human. And yet, we're not our thoughts, emotions, and sensations. But having those ever-changing thoughts, emotions, and sensations are part of being human, and they're always in motion. Those parts of us, right? Our thoughts constantly going, our emotions constantly up and down, our sensations, we're feeling different things. So how can we grow our relationship with each of these centers and learn to speak the languages that each speak? No, the promise. When I think about those of you that may know Daniel Goleman, he's an author and a scholar, and he talks about they'd done some research on what the difference was between a good and a great leader. And I spend a lot of time with corporate teams, and when I think about sharing this with them and the leaders within those organizations, Daniel Goleman spoke about these 3 pillars of emotional intelligence, because he said the difference between a good and great leader are that great leaders have emotional intelligence. And I was like, well, what does emotional intelligence mean? It's a word that's being used quite a bit, right? Well, he talks about it as having, that we have self-awareness for emotionally intelligent We also have empathy for the other person. And then we have the ability to create and maintain relationships. And when I thought about the great leaders in my life, they have this particular competency, right? So when you think about what integrative intelligence is, or when you think about utilizing all three centers, it can be a way and a path towards us being able to show up in life with our full selves, being able to show up to work in relationships with more of our being. Perhaps access the sense of creativity, the sense of great raw power that we have access to. So again, head, heart, gut. This is what we're going to be exploring today. The thinkers, when we're in our head center, this is the thinkers or perceivers. And again, the heart center, the emoters and relators. Yeah, perhaps some of you over-identify with one of these, or you can, yeah, I really know that particular center. Yeah. The gut center, the knowers and the sensors. But I do want to encourage you today as we explore these three particular centers in more detail. I know typically, you know how when we go to the Enneagram workshops and sessions, we can't wait to hear our type. But I actually want to encourage you to pay close attention to the center with which you might not know as much about. So, let's dive into the head center. The head center, or my head man here, is part of that, regulates again that neocortex part of the brain. Suzanne Zurcher talked about this center as like being a microscope or a telescope. Yeah, we can dive in deep, we can also step back at a 30,000 foot view. You know, this is the IQ, or when you think about intellectual intelligence. So of the three intelligences, you think about, this is called the thinking man, where the control tower is their mind. These people perceive the world through the mental faculties. Yeah. So as humans and leaders, we need the center for analyzing, conceptualizing, scenario planning, figuring things out, generating ideas. This center is really important. When you think about, it speaks the language of rational and irrational thought. Yeah? So, back to our house. You think about if we're spending a lot of time on the third floor. Say, let's see, this is going to be the head center. There's a high alertness survival function that happens in our brains, and that also when our needs are not being met. And this can be fear, and fear signals to us that our security is being threatened. You think about that. Think about the last time you were experiencing fear. Can you go back there? Not that I want to evoke or call up a lot of fear here, but think about it. Isn't that fascinating? Fear is a signal to us that our security is being threatened. Yeah? So if you or someone else you know is experiencing fear, it'll give you a different sense of, oh, wow, okay. Yeah, what's being threatened? I talk about our thoughts. You know, very rarely do I think that when I am so in my brain and up in my head, I am not in the present moment. And it's like a game of ping pong. And scientists will say that the two parts, I would think about the two players here in this ping pong game that are happening when I'm in my head. You've got the past, which are memories, and then we jump to the future, which is prediction, right? And it's going back and forth and back and forth. And how often do you think about when you're in your heads, think about when you're at work during the day, how often are your thoughts on what's going to happen on Friday night? Yeah? And how about on Friday night, where's your brain then? Oh, what was that thing I left at work? Yeah, so this game of ping pong, back and forth. You know, one thing I'd encourage you in this particular center, or a takeaway here is, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Byron Katie and some of her work. Beautiful work. Right, talking about, is the story that I'm telling myself, this thought that keeps reoccurring in my mind, is it true? Think about how much time we spend in our stories. How many calories we actually waste on these particular stories. So even by just asking ourselves the question, is it true? How powerful that is. Yeah. 15 seconds. Did you know that science will say that it takes 15 seconds for a positive experience to imprint on our brains, but it takes less than 1 second for a negative one? 15 seconds for a positive experience to imprint on our brain, but less than 1 second for a negative one. What does that mean? Anybody?
We're wired for negative.
We're wired. Yes.
We're like good seers.
Yeah. Pretty fascinating, right? So the next time that you are experiencing a negative emotion or a negative experience, remember, oh, my brain's going to hold on to that. It's kind of like those bad experiences are like Velcro, and the positive experiences are like slippery, right? Yeah. So even the next time that you have a positive experience, what if you stopped and paused and can count to 15, trying to rewire your brain a bit? Let's make this one stick this time, not just the negative experience. Do an overview of the heart center, and then we're going to do an exercise. But the heart center, if the head center is IQ, intellectual intelligence, and is the telescope or microscope, when you think about the heart center or EQ connected to the limbic center of the brain, these motors and relators, this can be like our heart center is like a barometer, taking the pulse in the room, right? If you think about the 2s, the 3s, the 4s, it's almost as if I see a lot of times their energy out there. Their energy is out to the other person. What's happening? I always talk with the heart centers. Oh, as Helen Palmer says, be 80% in your body and 20% out there. Yeah, can you all experience that with me right now? How different that is? How often our energy is with the other person? Yeah. We're hardwired for empathy, by the way. And if there's any question of that, you think about it. If I'm seeing a spider crawl up your arm, my brain almost can't identify if that's happening to you or me right away. And I'm going to jump. So I often get the question, yeah, my colleague, he is not empathic. Maybe everybody else is hardwired for it. He perhaps may not be. Yes, we all are hardwired for empathy. So we need this particular center. As leaders, as humans, when you think about how to attune to others, when you're thinking about mentoring others, or how about reading a room, right? We need this particular center. So, and I want to call this out because I recognize I believe that we overuse the words feelings, and we might attach it to this particular center. I actually believe that feelings are connected to the gut center, and I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But emotions are reactive and skin deep. They're outward expressions in which we convey our condition to another. And feelings are inward and connected to bodily sensations. So we can be emotional but not know what it is that we're feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We can be emotional but not know what it is that we're actually feeling. So the heart center speaks this language of connections, emotions, relatedness. Beautiful center. You think about if we're going back to the heart center, back to our house, talk about this being, we're on high alert if we're experiencing sadness or distress or panic. Yeah? Distress and sadness, they may signal to us that there's an absence of connection. I find that so fascinating. I've been testing this, and I encourage you to as well. when you think about a time that you're experiencing sadness, or you know a friend who's experiencing sadness, is it a signal that there is a loss of connection from something or someone? And I'll tell you a little story here, because it was after my second chemo treatment, and I knew that I was probably going to lose my hair. And I had spent years actually doing research with a lot of beauty brands, and so I had spent so much time working with cosmetics and hair brands, and you know, it was a tough thing to think that I might be losing my hair. And I heard that a small percentage of people did lose their hair, and I was holding out that maybe I would be in that small percentage. But no. I'll never forget the morning I woke up and went in to brush my hair, and a big clump of hair came out. And it just happened to be the day that my colleagues in Cincinnati, they had invited me to a video conference, and I didn't know what it was about. So I jumped on the video and I heard the sound, and it was the sound of buzzers. And there were a bunch of my colleagues shaving their heads. And even one woman, Kathy, who I'll never forget her saying as they were shaving her head, she says, "I have not my hair." Oh, powerful. One of my favorite examples of empathy. How powerful. So, you know, Sean and I were just talking about this the other day, about the more distance and time that comes since cancer, the more I have this ability to kind of fall back into my old patterns, to perhaps go to sleep. It was really strange. While I was sick, my friends and my family said, "You're remarkably clear." And when you think about it, sometimes when we're in this life and death situation, a lot of things just fall off to the side, right? Yeah, they fall off. It doesn't matter as much. And then the further it goes away, I can tell you how long I either fret about things or become anxious about things. And anxiety is an emotion that I experience quite often. We have quite a close relationship. And I started the company that I now am building and growing 2 years ago. And oh my goodness, I don't know how many of you own your own companies, but you think about the ups and downs of that particular experience and how much anxiety is present. Yeah? Am I going to make it? Are the customers going to come? What's going to happen? And I started experiencing so much anxiety and fear. And I'm a morning meditator. I'll get up and meditate, usually around 5 or 5:30 a.m. And oh, was I having a hard time. It just was not, it was not pretty. And I tried all of the things that I had tried in my life, like ignoring it, turning it around for the good, right? Trying to rationalize it. But nothing was working. And then one morning, it hit me, what if I've been doing this all wrong? And what if all of our emotions, even the challenging ones, are conspiring in our favor? That would change the way in which that I approach this particular emotion or anxiety. So, I think about it like this. I think about it that we all have these shelves in our house with, I call it the shelf of emotions. And you might have some of your favorites. Evidently mine's anxiety. I like that one. So I take it off and I carry it around with me throughout the day and the week. And I hold on to it so long that I forget that it's something that I can actually set back up on the shelf. And so now it just becomes a part of me. I'm walking around with it. Yeah? Can you identify those emotions? Okay. Yeah. So I came up with this process as a head type, big surprise, but a process for how to work with emotions. So I'll walk you through it now in case it's helpful for you. It's a 5-step process. ITALK is the acronym. But step 1, is identify the emotion that you're experiencing. And this may be really easy for you. I'll tell you what, it is not so easy for me. I can't really very easily identify the emotions that I'm experiencing, and I have found some tools to help me with that. There's an app called Stop, Breathe, Think. Any of you know that app? Yeah? Oh, I find it so helpful because I'm able to go in and it'll ask you, how are you mentally feeling? How are you physically feeling? And then it'll give you a list of emotive words. And it's like I'm going in a store, my favorite store, and trying on clothes. I'm trying on the emotions. Does this one fit? Does this one look right? Is that what I'm experiencing? So identify the emotion. Lisa Barrett Feldman wrote a book, and she talks about emotions and how emotions were made. And I love what she says in the book too, that just by, and there's science that supports this, but just by identifying and speaking an emotion actually will reduce it and release it. And when we hold on to it, and it stays trapped in our bodies, and it actually feels it. So how powerful, even when you think about the exercise that we're doing, that we started off with today, of thinking about keeping things moving, and how do we keep our emotions moving. So identify, step one. Step two, the disruptor. Thank it. Now, Glennon Doyle, used to be Glennon Doyle Melton, wrote a book, and one of the things that she talks about, I think it was in Love Warrior, she says, she has this beautiful saying about pain. She said, pain is like a traveling professor. He goes from door to door and knocks. But it's the wise who say, come on in, sit down, and don't leave till you've taught me what you need to teach me. So powerful. And think about, you can even exchange any different emotion word and put it in there instead of pain, right? Yeah, how about loneliness is a traveling professor. He goes from door to door and knocks. And only the wise say, come on in, sit down, and don't leave until you've taught me what you need to teach me. Powerful. So giving it our gratitude and our thanks for being here. Step three, ask. Ask it. If it is, I started to see my emotions as sometimes they're like this little blob, this little cartoon character, just objectifying it. Sometimes I see it as like a little Yoda, for those of you that like Star Wars. If we're accepting it and asking it, what are you here to tell me? What are you here to show me? It's got some wisdom. So there's something that we can ask and hear. In the next step, listen. Mark Nepo, another author, poet, my favorite poet, wrote a book called 7,000 Ways to Listen. Because he found out that there are actually 7,000 spoken languages in the world. And he thought, if there's 7,000 ways to speak, there must be 7,000 ways, at least 7,000 ways to listen. What are some of those ways that we can use to listen? Not just with our ears. How about listening to nature? Listening to others' body language? What does that say? Right? Anything else that comes to mind? What's that? Listen to your gut. Yeah, you got it. Listen to your gut. And then know that the answer will come. What I found is, probably back to Lisa Feldman's research, but the more that I go through this process, it doesn't take the emotions away. It's not the gist here. But it does help me be able to regulate and move through them. So, I wanted to give us an opportunity to practice this. And it's okay, bear with me. I know this is the part of some of these sessions, what do I have to do here? But speaking to the sense of consciousness, I'm going to give you all 3 minutes of silence to journal. And if you reach underneath your chair, you should find a paper like this. opportunity to practice this, but taking a couple of minutes and going through this process. So first, what is it? Can you identify an actual emotion that you're experiencing now that's troubling you? I would say right now, one thing that if I'm experiencing one right now, is a little bit of there's nervousness. Yeah, speaking to you all right now. So it's identifying it. Nervousness. Okay. Well, then the next step would be thanking it. Thank you, nervousness, for being here. And asking it, what is it that you want to show me? Perhaps I need to slow down a little. Take a deep breath. That's where you're listening to it. Listen to the answer. And know that will come. I'm going to give you 3 minutes just of silence to reflect on this and fill this out. Approaching it like a concept. Yeah. So I encourage you to find a partner in the room too, that's someone that you don't know. So if you came in with somebody that you know, find someone that you don't know. And I'll give you 3 minutes. I'll play it time to switch. Microscope or telescope, and the heart center more of a barometer. The gut center, or as I'm calling it, SQ, somatic intelligence, is more like a seismograph. You think about seismograph being able to measure the earthquake. How stable am I right now? So we've got IQ, intellectual intelligence, EQ, emotional intelligence, SQ, somatic intelligence. So the sensoring are connected to the reptilian part of the brain, regulates the reptilian part of the brain. This is the physical man. You think about, as leaders, as humans, we need this particular center for things like ability to sense what's needed in a situation or what another needs from us. Distinguishing right from wrong, good from bad, pain from pleasure, all that binary thinking. Yeah. That inner knowing, that instinctual intuition, being steadfast, holding our ground, being in control. All of those things. We need this particular center. So, the gut center speaks the language of sensations and knowing. Ever have that feeling where you just knew something in your gut? But you didn't have to go up into your head and figure it out or put rational thought to it. You just knew it in your gut. Yeah? A lot of times, understanding when I say trust in my gut, it comes from the learning of when I didn't trust my gut. Yeah. So back to our house. Again, when you think about those high alert survival reactions, and again, how when we talked about the head center, when our needs are not being met, being met, and we're in our head, we may be experiencing fear. When we're in that heart center, we may be experiencing that sense of sadness and distress. But the gut center can be that sense of when we're experiencing anger. So anger signals to us that there's a disruption in what we believe is right. Or maybe the way that things should be. Yes? You know, I think about my boyfriend, he's a 1. He's a lovely man. So yes, I have a man in my life now, and he's a phenomenal partner. And as a 1, and he's from New Jersey originally. So, and for those of you that don't know the states, New Jersey and the New Yorkers are known for their erratic driving. And they get angry at all the other drivers. And oh my goodness, he is the most calm, peaceful, collected person until you put him behind the wheel. And he gets so angry. And when I talk about this, you know, he'll get angry at the traffic lights, he'll get angry at the other drivers. You know, anger is a signal to him that something isn't right or the way it should be. That traffic light should not be there. Why did they put that in there, right? That driver should not have just cut me off. So anger, it's a signal to us that something is not right or as it should be. Really fascinating way to approach your emotions. Yeah, the next time you're angry, if you can take that 15 seconds, even 2, just that time to pause. What's going on? What's out of alignment right now? What do I think is something that is not as it should be? So, you know, when I first was diagnosed, I felt like I had to rely on the doctors to tell me what my body was saying and what was going on with my body. And I quickly found out that that's not necessarily the case. I can tune in to my own body sensations. For instance, my voice right now. I think I need a drink of water, so I'm going to take one. But listening to those body sensations, I don't need my doctors always to be the one to tell me what's going on with my body. Now, yes, they have these great machines and these tests, and those are all very helpful, of course. We need those things. But what can I do to tune into my body? I remember during one of my hospital visits, the nurse would come in every 4 hours and give me heparin shots in my leg. And it was supposed to keep me from getting blood clots. And after a couple days, I was so black and blue and bruised from these heparin shots. And I didn't even know what they were for. And I started to feel that sense of anger. Things are not as they should be. This is not right. And I finally stopped and said, the next time the nurse came in, this is probably after 3 days, and I was black and blue, I said, no more. I don't need that shot. I don't need that. And crazy, something wild happened. She said, okay, and she left. And I was doing just fine. I was getting up, I was moving, I was walking. I made sure too, I was understanding, what is it that I need to do? But I didn't need that. I don't always need to rely on others and the medical professionals to tell me what it is that's going on in my body. I also recognize that I typically can catch when I'm getting sick right after as it's happening. Just because of the practice of tuning into my body and noticing what sensations, what is my body trying to tell me right now? Oh, my throat is dry. I better drink some hot tea. Oh, another kind of crazy thing happens. This is a little personal, so I hope you guys can handle this. After my surgeries, and I had to go through a bilateral mastectomy and reconstruction, which was one of my surgeries. But I have this strange internal alarm system that is built in. Because when I feel stress and tense, my chest gets so tight. It feels like someone's pulling a rubber band behind me and squeezing it. It's so fascinating to me. So when that happens, it's usually an indication to me that I need to stop and pause and slow down and breathe. What a gift. What a gift that I have that. What are those things for you? What are those things that you're ignoring in your body or that you notice? Another thing is I used to be able to, again, this probably will not surprise you as a 7, I would travel sometimes 6 weeks in a row. doing work and meeting with clients. And I could go and go and go. And then I could go to dinner afterwards, right? And then I could travel on to the next city. I can't do that anymore. My mom reminds me part of that is getting older. I also, though, recognize that I really need to listen to my body. When I start to feel this thing in the back, my lower back, which usually happens sometime early evening, it's an indication to me I need to sit down. I need to stop. And when I can listen to the great intuition that my body is telling me and my gut is telling me, oh, do I do so much better. It's like I'm giving myself love. I'm remembering that there was a moment when I was bald and sick, and I was finishing my chemo treatments, and I had this really transformative moment where I sat down at my vanity and I looked at myself in the mirror. And I weighed 20 pounds less than I do now. And I was not in great shape. But it was like I saw my soul for the first time. And I, at that moment, vowed that I would take care of myself like I would a best friend. And that has really been life-changing for me. Because how often, if your friend was going through something and struggling and having a hard time, what would you tell her or him? Be good to you. Take care of yourself. Yet how often are we telling ourselves the opposite? I need to push forward. I need to get this thing done. I need to make sure I'm doing this thing. How can we stop being at war with ourselves and our body and instead connect with love? So, yes, part of my encouragement to you, how do you treat yourself like a best friend? And that. Another exercise I'd like to do, because I remember finishing up my my treatments and having this fascination with understanding these centers. And even when I was finished, it was more like, I didn't understand the gut center. Like, what does that even mean? I remember asking my therapist, how can I increase this particular center? I want to understand it more. And she had some great advice of like thinking about utilizing art and getting into my body and doing these things. But I found this exercise to be extremely helpful. So I want to invite you, if you would, to stand up for a moment, because I know you've been doing a lot of sitting. And since we're in the gut center, which also has this element of body, I'll invite you to practice this with me now. So I'll run through it and then I'll let you practice it. But this is a great way if you're wanting to know how to get into this gut center. It's identifying 5 things that I see right now and look at them and name them. And then 4 things that you can touch and actually touch them. So if you need to move around the room, feel free to do that. 3 things that you can hear. Amazing what you can hear in the sense of silence, things that you never heard before. And I would encourage you not just to even think about it like what it is out there, but what is it that you hear? Can you hear your breath? Can you hear your heartbeat? 2 things that you smell, and smell them. And then 1 thing that you can taste, and taste it, even if it's just your saliva. What does saliva taste like? Have you thought about that? What if we didn't have it, right? And then it probably would taste very different to us when experiencing it for the first time, but we have it. So identifying how can you describe that? So I'm going to give you a moment to do that. Share? Yes. It takes us out of our head, doesn't it? Yeah. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. Lovely. Anybody else you experienced?
It's very calming. It's very calming. And it's worth me to hear this logic. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
I think it's also something you could do with all ages. So I imagine being able to do this with maybe young kids and up to anyone else.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, yes, something for kids, right? So, interestingly enough, this can also be used, the I-talk acronym, this process, can be used with our sensations and also our thoughts. So, what if all of our sensations are conspiring in our favor? What would that mean? Being able to identify the actual sensation you feel in your body, think it, ask it, listen, and know? No? Yeah, so why don't I give you an opportunity? Oh, this is fascinating too. There is research in science that shows that our bodies, we physiologically experience emotions for only 90 seconds. Now, when I first heard that, I was like, there is no way. I'm still holding on to something that happened yesterday, last week, last month, actually years ago. Right? How can that possibly be true? But what science will share, and this is from Jill Bolte Taylor, who wrote a book called A Stroke of Insight. Amazing book. She actually was a neuroscientist that would study the brain and stroke victims, and then she found herself alone in her apartment having a stroke, and was able to actually be able to connect with someone and get help quickly. It's a fascinating read if you get the chance to read it. But she talks about this 90 seconds idea. And so, yes, our bodies physiologically experience an emotion for 90 seconds. After that, we send that emotion up into our head, and now we're playing a game of ping pong with it. Is it really here right now, or was it happening, 5 minutes ago? So now we're in a game of ping pong of memory and prediction. Memory, prediction. What I have to say is that we may feel angry only for 90 seconds. After that, we're thinking angry. Yeah, the next time you're holding on to an emotion, give yourself 90 seconds. So the practice, I'd love to give you the opportunity to practice this as well with our sensations. When I think about it, what is it that I'm experiencing right now? I feel a little bit of cramping in my toe. Well, because why in the world do we as women wear these heels, right? But being able to think and ask it, listen and know. So I give you just a couple minutes. If you need an extra sheet of paper, I've got one here. Or if you'd like to continue to take notes on that one, if anyone needs another one. I give you another 3 minutes just to process this, go through this process, thinking about your bodily sensations. See if you can tap in. About and it's important to say that our emotions have an effect on our bodies, right? So if we don't work through those emotions, they can get trapped in our body. So what does that mean for ourselves? It's important to listen to our bodies, and as you said so beautifully, our body gives us thanks back. Yeah, it says thank you. It says thank you right back to us. Wonderful. Yes, so let's talk a little bit about integration. Can you guys hear me okay still? Right. You know, when I was a kid, on Saturday mornings, one of my favorite cartoons was the Super Friends. And the Super Friends were all of these great superpowers and superheroes, and they would hang out in the Hall of Justice. And the Hall of Justice was the place where, again, they would all just kind of hang out, where they weren't off saving the world. And there was this brother-sister duo called the Wonder Twins. And they were twins, obviously. And they had this little monkey named Gleek, which has no significance here, except for that I thought he was always a little funny monkey. But what would happen is that these Wonder Twins, they would come together and hit fists. And they would say, form of, and usually one of them was forming of some sort of animal. And the other one would form of something like a bucket of water or ice. The idea was they were able to connect and become something together that they couldn't become on their own. So I love this reference, and as I'm thinking about it, how can you connect with those three centers inside of you so that you can become something more than you are today? You know, the Enneagram is not just a tool to show us who we have been. It's also to show us how to be more fully human, more fully ourselves. And we have this potential to tap into being something so much more than we are. I had no idea before June of 2014 that I had all of these intricate, interesting parts that were trying to communicate with me. This internal committee, this internal board meeting. And you've got this too. And how can we show up as our best selves? I mean, the world is calling for it. We need one another so desperately. We need one another to show up as our best selves. And we are the superheroes in the story. You are. So how do we integrate our three centers? Well, we turn towards our thoughts, emotions, and sensations with objectivity, curiosity, presence. Like a curious scientist. Yeah, not the biased one, the curious scientist. I found how powerful that is by objectifying this process. You know, there's an author, his name, Jerry and I was talking about the other day, because I don't know this man personally, but someone had told me a couple months ago about this book by Dick Wright. He wrote this book called Enneagram Triads. And I ordered it, and I think it took me about 6 weeks to get it. I think they had to print it, probably, and bring it. But I found it fascinating, and it really prompted some ideas for me. I know that there are also some other authors that have talked about the centers. Hurley is one. I think if any of you have looked at her book, it's pretty good. I think she wrote it with another author that I can't remember his name at the moment. Forgive me. Yes, thank you. And so, but he was talking about this path of integration, and he talked about, how we all have this path, depending on what center that we focus on the most, or where we find ourselves the most. And by the way, I'm not saying that just because you might be a head center, are you not first showing up at times from your heart center, or a heart center that's typically showing up from our gut center. It doesn't necessarily mean just because I'm a 7, I'm always just focusing on this path. Now, in this situation, I'm using this example because I do find myself in my head an awful lot. Yeah, and I'm learning how to practice. It's even as much practice as I do, it's still the thing that I have to work on. But he talked about having this auxiliary function when you're in your head, and then a buried function. So there's a path, and I'll show these to you for all the three centers. But what I found really interesting is soon after I read this, I had a beautiful experience to practice it. Because there was anxiety popping up again. My favorite book on the shelf, a knick-knack on the shelf, and I was carrying it around. And in the mornings after I have my tea and I meditate, I usually will go for a walk. And I was feeling this particular anxiety. And my first inclination, because I do this a lot, is I need to know more. I don't know enough. Can't tell you, even like leading up to this, even I've been working on this stuff and bringing this together, this fascinating bit of work for a year. It's I don't know enough. I need to know more. I need to learn more. What else can I? And I remember, wait a minute. What if I do know enough right now? Right? But I was, on this particular day, I was walking on the golf course, and I was putting in my earbuds, and I was going to listen to another podcast to give you more information. Yeah. And all of a sudden, luckily, in this moment, this is a success story, I caught myself. And I thought, no, I am going to follow this particular process, and I'm going to actually connect with my gut. And the best way I knew how to do that was go through that exercise that we just did, connecting to my senses, because our senses, again, are a powerful way for us to experience our gut center. And so I did this. I was 5 things that I see, 4 things that I can touch, and 3 things that I can hear, 2 things that I can smell, 1 thing I can taste. And before I knew it, I was walking along the path, and I was then I started looking into the eyes of people that I was passing. And before I knew it, the anxiety had relaxed. And I had followed this particular process. And I realized this. This is my best way to describe it. It's like, in this instance, my head center was my compulsion. It was my addiction. I am addicted to having to know more information and bring more and know more, and I never know enough. And it's like our auxiliary function, whatever that is for us in the moment, is like a sponsor in a 12-step program. It's like it might be able to save us from our compulsion if we can follow it, right? So I ended up realizing that when I am in that trap, that addiction of wanting to, and believing I need to know more and know more and know more, if I can turn to and call my sponsor, which is my gut center, and become more present and grounded, then it leads me to that buried center, which of course that makes sense. It's why I have a hard time identifying the emotions that I'm experiencing, right? And I'm operating. I've got the board members in the room. The committee is all showing up. And I was able to move forward on with the day and laugh at myself a bit. So, this was like his process, as Dick Wright talked about, and this is interesting. I should bring this up. It says do next to heart. Now I know that there's some people might think, well, the doing or action with the gut center. I'm just sharing his process here, which I thought was really fascinating because he talked about the heart center are, that they are doers. And I thought about this. I thought, the 2s in my life are helpers. They want to do for others. Again, their energy is out there. The 3s, too, they're very fast at getting things done. There's a lot of doing involved with being a 3. Right? The 4 is that creative sense of energy. They're doing. So there's many different ways and different ideas out there. I found this really interesting. It had me question that a bit. Oh, the heart center. Yeah, they're doing. That's why I experience people from this heart center, again, as their energy outside of their body, as we talked about before. They're doing a lot out there. How can they bring it back in? So, for the heart type, or if you find yourself in this particular center, and this is a compulsion. By the way, this center, their compulsion can be to connect. And sometimes they can even forget the human that's on the other. It is just really about the connection. And really needing that connection. Yeah, I see some heads. Yeah. So if you find yourself in this space, and it's a good check, again, you're my 80% of my body. And the auxiliary function for this center, as Dick Wright described it, was the head, moving into the head space. I think about a friend of mine, or she's a client, and has become a friend, and she's a type 2, beautiful superpower 2. She runs an organization in Melbourne, Australia. And she talks, and we've talked about this a bit. She said, yep, when I am so into that connecting space, into that needing to connect and do for others, she goes, if I can stop and spend time on my own and reflect, then I'm able to move into my body and be present. How fascinating. Yeah, I don't know about that. There's the heart center in the rooms. And we'll talk about this later, but oh wow, would I love to continue this conversation. And especially as a researcher like I am, I'd love to hear your experiences with this as you practice this.
Christy,
Yes.
question. So you're saying for the people who find themselves in the heart center of life, the head will always be this very much?
This is again according to Dick Wright, which I find really fascinating, so I'm still testing it out. Yeah, what do you think?
What you made me think of is, we have a stacking in our report. In the
Yes.
gut. Would you observe your second or would it be head? Yeah.
It's a good question. Yeah, I think it's, I would see it almost as being second. So that's stacking second.
But he puts it as though it's always go from heart to head.
That's what he's saying. In order to get to the gut center and to be able to integrate all three, it's moving from the head, the heart to the head. So it's realizing again, I'm going to call my sponsor. I'm going to call my head center. I've got to be able to reflect. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But please let me know.
No, I'm also wondering the same question. I think, would it be your second that would be a better sponsor, or would it be the right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm speaking more from this one. I think that my sponsor is the gut center. So, but let's continue to explore it. Yeah, please.
If you think about where they position on the Enneagram, the gut, heart, head, they kind of move in a clockwise direction. So that's kind of how I make sense of it, is that if you're in the heart, if that's your primary sensor, you move through the head to the gut. If you're in the gut, you move from the gut through the heart to the head. If you're in the head, you move through the heart to the gut.
I don't know, I'm just wondering if the stacking might just tell you that the person might really battle to get through.
Love it. Thank you. Path integration for the gut center. That feeling, remember again, the difference between emotions and feelings. So this is, I've written feel here, because we're feeling those particular sensations that from that deeper place within us. Emotions are skin deep and outward. Emotions, our feelings are deep within our body. So that feeling in the gut. Auxiliary function here, the sponsor. Sorry. Okay. Yes. Is auxiliary function that doing, moving to the heart center, or that connection, speaking the language of connection, that will then connect us to that buried function in the head. So I'm thinking of another leader that I work with, it's a type 8, and he talks about being in that gut center quite often, obviously, feeling that space, and talks about that when he can connect with others, there's a softening that happens, an opening up that happens. Because from that vulnerability, you think about how, as an 8, that it's just the on guard and the avoiding that vulnerability. And then you see that vulnerability come. That vulnerability is coming when they're able to then relax and connect with others. Look into the eyes of others. By the way, and another way to get into your heart center, if you can all put your hand on your heart right now, and then look around the room into the eyes of others. You know that what this does is actually releases oxytocin, which is like it's the relational hormone. Did we talk about it? The relational. It's like the same thing that's released when mothers breastfeed. It's a way to get you into your heart center. If you're ever like, I don't know how to practice that, you can try that exercise. Just by putting your hand on your heart, looking in the eyes. So, yes, so again, remembering there's so much more in this beautiful map of the Enneagram. The Enneagram being our base camp, and integration into the center, or integration towards the top. And you know what? There's something beyond that. Do you want to know what it is? So do I. I'm so anxious and excited to figure it out and to explore it further. And we think about the Wizard of Oz. I love this because we think about what a great description of our head, our heart, and our gut. Chris Hurts talks a bit about this in his book, Sacred Enneagram, which is fantastic. And I know that he has referenced it from some other earlier writers. When you think about we're all integrating on this yellow brick road together, and how can we show up as our best selves? Love those parts of ourselves. Because you are the hero in the story. You are the resilient one. Life can bring us to our knees at times, and unexpectedly. It's part of being human. I wanted to share this process with you today and this experience because just with the hope that you don't have to go all the time through all this sense of suffering when life brings you to your knees. It has to give you something to be able to move through it with ease. I know that it's necessary, and sometimes we've just got to go through it. Right? I love this quote from Russ Hudson. Why me only a third of a person? Yeah. I think that was me for 40 years. A third of the person utilizing my center. And also, it was interesting. There was one point I was done with my my chemo, and I was in the midst of one of several surgeries, and I realized that my tumor was right here. It was blocking the path. Not that my body was experiencing this, but between my head and my heart. And I knew the tumor was gone, and now I had this clear path between my head and my heart, which is really powerful. So now I'm in this avid love affair with my heart and learning what it's like to be seen in my head. So I wanted to invite you, as we wrap up here, to practice this in the next 24 hours. I'm a big believer in breaking the habitual patterns that have been taken so long for us to have, right? I think we've been doing these particular habits for so many years, probably since childhood. But giving yourself the opportunity to practice I talk, identify, think, ask, listen, know. To recognize when we've got that 15 seconds of, I'm letting that negative experience quickly attach to my brain versus giving it, just stopping and pausing and giving that 15 seconds to be able to let that improve my brain. We're creating new pathways. Or even the 90 seconds when you find yourself holding on to those emotions. Am I feeling sad or am I thinking sad? Am I feeling angry or am I thinking angry? And to be able to practice this. So, I'm finding a great platform to be able to engage in conversation. I'm trying to get better at this. I'm not a big social media person, but LinkedIn has been a great way, especially, I'm like, I can do one. You're not going to find me on Twitter. I've got an Instagram account, I want to invite you to practice this in the next 24 hours. And I have extra sheets here if you want to take one with you. And I invite you to post about it on LinkedIn, or if you're not on LinkedIn, feel free to email me. This is my email address, or I've got cards I can leave. I'll put up here on the table. But I really am fascinated to hear what you're experiencing through some of this, and what your experience is through utilizing this framework. And I'm really grateful. You guys are such a wonderful group. Thank you for holding the space for me to, for the first time, share this and share this story, which was personal and a bit frightening. So I'm really grateful to all of you. Thank you.